World Spaceflight News Special Report. This excerpt from the WSN SpaceNewscast contains the highlight reel of the August 22nd press briefing following the meeting of the Artemis 1 Mission Flight Readiness Review, or FRR, with the most interesting statements given by NASA officials.
That I want to put this in perspective. This is a test flight, all right? And it's not without risk. We have analyzed the risk as best we can, and we've mitigated it also as best we can. But we are stressing Orion beyond what it was actually designed for, in preparation for sending it to the moon with a crew. And we want to make sure that it works absolutely perfectly when we do that, and that we understand all the risks. We're going to learn a lot from this test flight. There are certain cases that could come up that could cause us to come home early, and that's okay. We have contingencies in place, and the main objective that we really want to get out of this test flight, of course, is that stressing that heat shield, getting a test of that new Orion heat shield at lunar reentry velocities. So,
as Bob talked about the risk, we are pushing the vehicle to its limits, really stressing it to get ready for crew. It is incredibly risky. We talked about risks today. We talked about our mitigation steps for those risks. And we've mitigated the risk as far as we can, and now it's our time to get to launch so that we get that data that we need to put crew on it.
In terms of the mission management team, which I'll be chairing when we get to pick up at the Launch Minus 2-day review, which is essentially our launch readiness review, we have a series of decision gates that are in front of us. And the purpose of the mission management team is to provide oversight and risk acceptance, as well as to basically, if we are outside of our pre-planned criteria, to assess whether we should continue or whether we should knock it off as part of a flight test. We do have a series of checkpoints built into the mission, and we've trained those alongside of our operations teams, our launch team, our flight team, and our recovery team, as well as with our engineering support elements in Huntsville and in Houston. The test flight itself carries inherent risk, and we talked about that today. We talked about what we call moderate risk and high risks throughout. This is the first flight of a new rocket and a new spacecraft, and at its furthest point, the spacecraft will be nearly 290,000 miles from Earth before returning home. And this is the first human-class mission in over 50 years. So we're doing something that is incredibly difficult to do and does carry inherent risk in it. I guess one thing that I've been reflecting on today was a quote by Hugh Dryden, who was one of the founders of the Apollo program. And he talked about the purpose of flight testing, which was to separate the real from the imagined and the known from the unknown. So that's what Artemis 1 is all about.
As has been mentioned in previous press briefings, we have extended the time frame of our flight termination system that is required by the Space Launch Delta 45th to cover 3 launch attempts. I wanted to mention that since that was a change since we met last time. And then also we have finished up all of our launch team training. We've completed 30 sims, so our team is certified and ready to go. So we are on plan and certainly looking forward to call the stations coming up on Saturday.
The next steps will be we'll finally open up the hatch one more time, install the final our zero-G gravity indicator, Snoopy, so that'll be really exciting as well. We'll do final closeouts where we'll pull the soft covers from the windows and the seats and things like that, and we'll be ready to fly.
So now it's time for the big test of all. It is the combined environments test and flight. It's a test that we can't duplicate on the ground. We've tried our best with all the environments we have, but this is the reason we fly, to fully understand the vehicle. So we're excited about it. At the end of the day, we went through all the polling. The team is ready, the rocket is ready, and we're here to support.
it was designed for 21 days. And that's what the European service module was certified for. Going 42 days puts a lot more stress on all those systems, plus the environment that it's in. longer exposure to radiation, longer exposure to micrometeorite hits. We're going to learn a lot from this test flight. And the point is, we're stressing it beyond what it was designed for.
You stretch out the duration, the environment that you're going through on the 1.5 revs that we're going to go through on the DRO, that'll allow you to test out the systems fully as you go through that time frame of 42 days. And so that duration, along with, we're really trying to activate all the systems utilized. For example, optical nav. We're pushing the optical nav technology and be able to certify that for future flights when we don't have comm on the spacecraft potentially, and utilizing that as a navigation asset. So those are things that we're looking forward to in terms of demonstrating capability and pushing the envelope of the technologies that we have on board the spacecraft.
So on Artemis 1, we have a lean forward strategy to get our high priority objective, which is to demonstrate the heat shield at lunar reentry conditions. We are going to press to the point of translunar injection unless we're sure that we're going to lose the vehicle. So we've got a lean forward strategy here on this flight. We would be go on this flight for conditions that we would normally be no-go for on a crewed flight in the interest of crew safety. But because we want to buy down risk across the manifest and to understand this system and the system design and its margins, we are going to press through the point of translunar injection if at all possible. In terms of aborts, the vehicle is largely automated from the point of booster ignition all the way up through translunar injection. And we've got go-no-go criteria that have been established at various points along the way, including the translunar injection maneuver. And then we have a couple of gates prior to the translunar injection maneuver as well as prior to the perigee raise maneuver. And we could punch off the interim cryo propulsion stage while it's in a inhibited attitude control system phase. Those bars are set pretty high. We would only do that if, again, we were pretty sure we would lose the work. So that is something that is unique to this uncrewed flight test, and we're going to press ahead and press uphill unless we're sure we're going to lose it. I don't know. Probably the biggest one that was talked at our flight readiness review today was the hydrogen kickstart to thermally condition the engines. If you recall, coming out of the last wet dress rehearsal, that was the one open item that we had, and that is the one open item that we have headed into this launch countdown. And Charlie and her team have come up with a plan to demonstrate it before we get into terminal count. And that is something that we're going to demonstrate end-to-end for the first time on day of launch. And if we do not successfully demonstrate that, we are not going to launch that day. And I don't know, Charlie, if you have anything to add on the hydrogen kickstart.
No, I think you covered the hydrogen kickstart. We did, what we'll do is we'll plan to put that in after we get core stage LH2 or liquid hydrogen into replenish. And we'll close the vent valve on the core stage. That puts some pressure on it. We'll go and verify. First off, we'll verify the functionality of that 4-inch QD where we had the issue during wet dress rehearsal, verify that that's working correctly. Once we have a predetermined amount of kickstart bleed, it's about 45 minutes or so, and then we'll get into a vented bleed, and then after that we'll do the special pre-press test. Normally that would happen in terminal count. We would have done it in wet dress, but we weren't able to do that because of the issue that we had, and so we've added that into the launch countdown at a kind of a quiescent point, if you will, so that we can understand that prior to getting into terminal count where you have a lot of other dynamics in your system. And then with regard to other open work, I would just say from a pad flow perspective, we are really down to those 2 tests we talked about. We'll get into those tomorrow. One is we'll go through and we'll do our safe and arm rotations. We have already completed, Howard talked about the late stow work that we did this weekend, the Orion hatch closure. And so that's behind us. So now really we're just looking at that RF testing, the safe and arm rotations, the booster servicing, and then getting into our launch countdown preps and then into launch countdown proper. But all of that work is very, very well choreographed, laid out, and again, very consistent schedules with what we had going into wet dress.
Yes, we have 10 CubeSats on this flight. we talked at the flight readiness review today. 5 of those have been essentially topped off in terms of battery state of charge. We've had open communications with each of the CubeSat customers as to access and just design constraints all the way up through the install on the vehicle. Prior to that, we had the payload safety review process, and we are at the point where we're getting ready to fly. The remainder of those CubeSats, we, based on analysis, believe have sufficient charge to conduct a mission. Some may actually need to recharge after they're deployed, after they gain some solar power through their solar arrays, but we believe each of these has a mission. That said, the CubeSats are relatively low cost. They have relatively low levels of redundancy and a relatively high failure rate. So we do anticipate one or more of these CubeSats to not be successful in its mission, just due to the nature of the CubeSats themselves. We've put considerable planning and effort into what we call alternate missions, and we're going to go as high as we're able to within the consumables and the systems that we have. If we have a performance problem on the rocket, we're going to fly as far as we can, and there are cases where we can try to make some of that up with either the intercrowd propulsion stage, the upper stage, if there's a core stage performance issue, and then there are other cases where we may be able to complete the translunar injection maneuver using the Orion spacecraft and its service module. So from an integrated performance standpoint, there are scenarios where we'll fly as high as we can. If we are uncomfortable for whatever reason, performance or systems-wise, with entering the distant retrograde orbit, we have alternate missions that would allow us to downmode to a lunar flyby. At translunar injection, we are not targeting a free return trajectory, but we could adjust to downmode to a free return trajectory about the moon. And then if we didn't have enough performance to do a lunar flyby, we could do a very high elliptical orbit and go out as far as we could towards the moon and come home. Or we could do a high Earth orbit, or we could do a low Earth orbit. So depending on the performance margin available and depending on the systems problem, we could fly as high as we could, and that's part of our alternate mission strategy. In terms of pushing Orion, one of the cases that we've talked about is a failed solar array deploy. If you look at our timeline, we normally separate from the core stage, we deploy the solar arrays, we do the perigee raise maneuver, and then the translunar injection maneuver. If we had a failed solar array deploy, we would proceed. And that is something that we wouldn't necessarily do on a crewed flight. There are a number of other systems that we've agreed to proceed forward with, and we could be zero fault tolerant. We could be on the last remaining string of our guidance and nav system, on our propulsion system, on a whole host of other systems, and we would proceed through TLI.